It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Suckleton.
2 weeks in a row, buddy. We're on a roll.
Battling through a cough. Yeah, to remind us to 2 weeks of NBA pods in a row. Jason's playing through illness. He's trying to avoid being like, listen to him. I don't know if you can hear it after we do the audio, but you might hear Jason's cough a little bit tonight. But he's toughing it out. He's going back to backs. He's not like Joel Embiid tonight in Denver, who is not. Did he even make the trip to Denver? Is he allergic to Denver?
I think
he's definitely not playing in Denver. So
hey, listen, we're
glad you're here, Jay.
He played Friday. He's not playing Friday, hopefully, right? He's not going to play Friday.
I don't know. It doesn't matter. I don't think it matters. Although I did hear that they're 6-1 when Maxey, Paul George, and Embiid all play together. So for whatever that's worth, and then I think they're 5-19 or something when they don't play. So
great. All right. Well, we're going to start, Mike, with our NBA wins total. And I decided that I was going to track from week to week now what the spread is. Does that make sense? So
that makes sense.
Like last week, I was up 17. Now, I don't include any of the games tonight. I did not include any games tonight. I'm up 25 now, Mike. You're in big trouble, buddy. You're in big trouble. Maybe.
Holy cow, 25.
Yeah. So I went up by 8. Listen, this week your teams that hurt you were not the Pelicans because they won a few games.
Pelicans are winning. I thought that would help me.
And the Kings are winning too. Right?
Warriors are hurting me.
No.
Yeah.
Here's the Warriors not winning, but more importantly, the Mavs are hurting you right now. Okay, you have the Magic had a terrible week. They were terrible this week.
Yeah, they lost tonight too. They lost tonight to the Raptors. So
well, they've lost 4 in a row now. So, but yeah, I don't know. You're you're not doing so hot. Like, sorry. Mike, you're cutting in big time, in and out big time.
Okay. All right, let's wrap it up.
Hello, YouTube. Mike's switching to the phone because of his Wi-Fi. His Wi-Fi's having issues, so we're just gonna keep the session going. I apologize for my cough. Apologize. I'm actually going to mute myself.
Hey, there I am.
Yeah, much better.
How you doing?
Much better.
All right. Yeah, we'll just try. We'll try this. Let's see. All right. We're not gonna. Oh, anyway. All right. Let's try it. We'll go with this.
Right.
Actually, what I need to. Let me.
It's still recording, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, I know. Hold on one second. Well, it's recording. I'm not recording me. Like I haven't started. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's still recording.
Yeah, I guess I am recording. All right, I'm just gonna do one thing real quick. All right, how's that?
Looks good. Still grainy, but I can at least you're not breaking up, and I can make out what you're saying.
You hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. All right. Let's go with it. All right, you ready?
I'm ready to go whenever you are, buddy.
All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkle tonight. Back-to-backs for Jay. Unlike Joel Embiid tonight in Denver, Jason's playing through a little bit of an illness, so you might hear him coughing, but we're glad he's here. And we're going to talk NBA disappointments. But first, Jay is going to share the win shares pool here that we did with our draft. I understand I'm not doing very well. Is that correct?
No, so last week you were up, you were down 17. Now you're down 25, Mike. So it's not a good look. The Warriors not winning. I'll tell you the other thing that's hurting you. The Spurs not losing that much, Mike. They're hanging in there, buddy. And Philly
Spurs
not winning.
Are gonna make the play-in.
And I think I predicted that. I think I said play-in at the beginning of the year, and you laughed at me. But I'll just put that.
I didn't totally. I can't. I totally discounted that, but
yeah. All right. Anyways,
he's certainly gonna be on one of the All NBA teams.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, Mike, is you picked Portland losses first, and then ended up being the Washington is the abysmal team, the most abysmal team, and Portland's at least somewhat competent in some games.
Scoot, man, do you see Scoot?
He's playing, man. He's playing.
Last he's averaging like 25 and 8. It's crazy. All of a sudden, out of nowhere.
The Chauncey effect, right?
Take him off the list for tonight.
Maybe. All right.
I don't know if you have or not, but you'd have to take him off.
All right. So that brings us to our topic of conversation tonight. And our topic of conversation is the biggest disappointments in the NBA so far. And I kind of left it open-ended. We could take it however we wanted to, Mike. I think some of our list is going to overlap. Other parts of our list is and once again, when I say disappointments, I'm not saying I'm surprised by this player, because in most of my disappointments, I'm not super surprised that they're a disappointment, and that's probably kind of harsh sounding that they're a disappointment, but that's at least the track that I'm taking, Mike, is I'm not surprised that I'm disappointed in this person, but I'm disappointed nonetheless. Does that make sense, Mike? Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? All right. So We're going to start with the elephant in the room here, literally, because as we are recording this podcast, and you already alluded to it, the Denver Nuggets are playing at home against the Philadelphia 76ers. And once again, Joel Embiid is sitting out for whatever knee, contusion, injury, swelling, I don't want to play in Denver injury he has right now. And he's my biggest disappointment, Mike, because is probably the biggest disappointment, because I just don't. Have we ever had such a fall from grace from an MVP? Like, I know Derrick Rose won the MVP, and I still contend that he did not deserve the MVP that year. But I still contend that LeBron deserved the MVP that year, and I will plant my flag in that until I die, probably. But Derrick Rose had a legitimate like ACL injury. I'm not out of shape. He tore his ACL, okay, afterwards, and he never was the same player. True or false? True or false? True, right, Mike? You agree?
Never came close to playing at that level. His athleticism was so important to him that when that was taken away with the ACL injury, he just never got back to that MVP level that he had at age 22, which was, again, crazy that he was, I think, the all-time youngest MVP at the time.
Yeah, so he won the MVP that year, okay? And he fell from grace because he tore his ACL. Joel Embiid has injuries, but like he had injuries before he won the MVP. He won the MVP now. And now this guy can't even see the floor. Like, it's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. I feel bad. I feel bad for Nick Nurse. a little bit, but he kind of knew what he was getting into when he signed up, right? I mean, he knew what a bag of tricks he was getting into. He had at least some some knowledge of the situation. But like, I don't know. I'm just
he should be on
that.
too.
What was that, Mike?
Nick Nurse should be on the list too.
No, you want to include him in the disappointment? I mean, I guess
his tenure, yeah, exactly lit the world on fire as a coach to this point. Now, look, I know he's been dealt a tough hand, but I don't think anybody is talking about Nick Nurse as a genius at this point.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Was Embiid on your list too, Mike? I have to imagine he was.
Well, I just had the Sixers in general. I mean, obviously Embiid as a sole entity for sure has to be on the list. And look, so much of what has caused him problems over the course of his career is injuries. And he's played, I believe, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe over the course of his career, including the first years after he was drafted, where he didn't play basically, that he's played about half the games that he's been eligible to play in. And yet, if you go back to those first 2 years when he was sitting out, I think that his career and the way it's played out, I think Philly would probably, sounds crazy to say, but I think Philly would take that when you look back at where he was drafted number 3, when clearly if he had been healthy, I think he would have been number 1 in the Andrew Wiggins draft when the Cavs picked Wiggins. And Embiid's had a remarkable career. And I know that you and I, particularly me, I've had a lot of negative things to say about him in terms of his performances in playoffs and how that relates to him being an elite player. But certainly him being a disappointment throughout his career has primarily been based upon injury. And I think to some degree the injury probably is related to his lack of conditioning, and who knows how you attribute to that in terms of, is that his work ethic? Is that his body type? Is that just the fact that he's injury prone, and because of that, then he can't work as hard to get himself in the best possible condition he can be in? I have no idea what the root cause of Joel Embiid's injuries and issues are, but I do know that this season for sure, Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia Sixers have been a disappointment. And yet at the same breath, if you'd have told anybody in Philadelphia when he sat out the first 2 years of his career that at some point the guy was going to win an MVP and have some of the seasons that he's been able to have, I think the people of Philadelphia and the front office at that time probably would take it. And obviously the scary part is he's been the most successful part of the process. When you Ben Simmons and his fall from grace, and you think about the fact that Markelle Fultz was taken number 1, and man, did that not work out, and now he's completely out of the league at this point. So the process has not really yielded much in the way of anything except for Joel Embiid. And so I think over the course of his career, you'd still say Embiid probably, I don't know, did he live up to what they thought he was going to be? I don't know how somebody would feel. I guess, again, when you look at those first 2 years, if you'd have said he'd have been an MVP and done the things that he's done in the regular season, you probably would have taken it. And yet at the same time, Philly's never made the conference finals. And now you're in a situation where the next 3 years, you're going to be paying Joel Embiid and Paul George north of $100 million for a team that, right now is sitting there with whatever 9 wins or whatever they have. 15 wins. Sorry to discredit them, but Philly's sitting there at 15 and 26, and the big 3 that they put together in the offseason that they felt like was going to become a potential Eastern Conference finalist and contender for the NBA title, just that team has not materialized in any way, shape, or form, and those guys haven't been able to stay healthy. Obviously, both Embiid and Paul George have a history of not being able to stay healthy, and so if you're Philadelphia, I'm not so sure how excited you are to be paying those 2 guys north of $100 million for the next 3 years. What are the chances that they play 50% of the games. I mean, Embiid's knee right now, they just keep saying it's swelling. It's not a new injury. That's a problem. And it's been a problem all year. And this team is, despite the fact that the bottom of the Eastern Conference is bad and Philly's not completely out of the chase for the number 10 seed and getting into the play-in, which Philly's clearly not going to tank. I mean, it's.
But they should, right?
No, they shouldn't, because they either have to tank completely, which I don't think is really possible, because their pick, I believe, goes to Oklahoma City. So if it falls outside the top 6, so basically if they are outside the play-in, but they finish sort of right where they are now, then you're looking at a situation where that pick is going to go to Oklahoma City. And if you look at the standings,
just what those guys
need.
The reality, just what they need.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have a ton of. I mean, they have so many picks over the next 5 to 6 years that, I mean, it's just as ridiculous. But if you look at where Philly is in the standings, right, overall in the entire league, when you take a look at that, I mean, the teams that are below them. So in the Eastern Conference, they have 15 wins. Brooklyn has 14. By the way, Brooklyn hasn't won since I said they were going to stay at the under of 18.5, and they've been abysmal. They're 1-9 in their last 10. So they're definitely in full-on tank mode. Plus, I'm sure they're going to get rid of Cam Johnson at some point. But if you look below the Sixers, Brooklyn, Charlotte, Toronto, the Wizards, to me, I don't think there's no way that any of those teams jump above Philadelphia. And then if you look in the Western Conference, Utah, Portland, there's no way those teams are jumping above the Sixers. And so you're looking at Philadelphia is going to be somewhere in the 7-8 range, which is exactly in the range that would force them to give up their pick to Oklahoma City. So it's crazy that they have to keep. I guess my point is they have to keep winning. They're not going to tank, because they'd have to tank below all those teams in order to be able to ensure themselves that they wouldn't have to get that pick. Otherwise, they'd be relying on having to jump up into the top 4 in order to not give their pick to Oklahoma City, which, again, if they're number 8, 9 worst in the league, they still could potentially jump up, but they would want to assure themselves to be below that top 6 number, because otherwise that pick goes to Oklahoma City in a draft that most people seem to think is pretty deep and that you're going to be able to get. If you're drafting in the top 10, that you're going to be able to get a pretty good pick. So Philadelphia has to be, I think, they were number 1 on my list when you consider how optimistic they were coming out of the summer and how much they were praised for what they were able to do in terms of attracting Paul George, who was the theoretical number 1 marquee free agent that was out there, and then some of the moves they made around the edges to be able to fill out their roster. And it hasn't worked because of the injuries. And in all honesty, neither one of those guys, Paul George in particular, hasn't played up to his capability when he's played. And so, yeah, Philly's got to be number 1 on the list.
He's lost. He doesn't enjoy the 5, Mike. He doesn't enjoy playing the 5 spot.
Well, that's understandable, but when you're being paid $50 million, you probably should just keep that to yourself. Yeah, you probably should keep that to yourself. That's what I would recommend in that case for Paul George. Yeah, I understand. You're a 6'8", 210-pound guy. You probably don't want to play a whole lot of center, but you're also being paid $50 million. So I think you could probably suck it up and play a little center if you had to.
All right. Do you want to do your next one, since yours kind of went with mine there?
With Philly. So my next one is going to be the Jimmy Butler Miami Heat situation. I'm going to stay in the Eastern Conference. And I think when you look at the Heat, I don't know that anybody necessarily thought that the Heat was going to be much better than what they are. I mean, they're currently number 9. I don't think anybody thought that they were better than the Cavs, Celtics, Knicks, or Bucks. So maybe you could argue that some prognosticators out there might have picked them to be number 5 in the Eastern Conference. Well, actually, I don't know. Would anybody think they would have been better than Orlando if Orlando was healthy? So maybe they could have competed for the number 6 spot, and they're currently number 9 and probably not in much danger of falling lower than that. The Bulls are behind them, and the Bulls are 19-25, whereas Miami's sitting at 21-21. But clearly, this situation with Butler, when they extended him last summer, it became clear that there was going to be some drama, some issue, something was going to happen because it's just the way Jimmy Butler rolls. And him deciding prior to this 7-game suspension that he was going to give less than maximum effort, and then getting the suspension and finally making all the statements that he's made. And now the fact that Butler only wants to go to Phoenix, which after you saw Phoenix live, tell me why he wants to go.
Well, that's on my list, Mike. So.
Yeah, but we'll get to that. But why does he want to go play in Phoenix with that team, which is clearly going nowhere? And to me, Jimmy Butler doesn't push that team over the top. So I think the situation with Butler is super disappointing. And then the other thing that goes along with, I think, Miami's struggles, Tyler Hero's had a great year, but Bam Adebayo has been a guy that has not played up to his capability. He's averaging 16 a game, and he's averaging, let me see, almost 10 rebounds, but he's not shooting the ball nearly as well. 45% for a big guy that doesn't really shoot threes. He's shooting 27% on 2.5 attempts. Bam has not been nearly as good as he's been over the past several seasons. And so I think that the combination of the Jimmy drama and Bam playing below his capability has made Miami a disappointment. Although, as I said off the top, I don't really think that where they are at 9th is really too far off of where anybody thought they'd be. I think most people thought maybe they're competing for that 6th seed and probably were just as likely to finish in the play-in somewhere, which is where they are now. So I think Miami's been a disappointment primarily because of the Jimmy drama and then Bam's performance this season, which has been below his standard that he's put up for the last couple of years.
All right, that's fair, Mike. All those things are fair. Miami was not on my list just because, I don't know, I just didn't have them on my list. All right, I'm going to go a little bit outside the NBA as a whole. It's tangentially related, Mike.
Outside the NBA.
Well, no. You'll understand why. I'm disappointed that no one has signed Zach Lowe. What is going on here? There's got to be some kind of like he has to be off, kind of like how Bill Simmons was off ESPN for a while. I mean, not that he was suspended or anything, but Lowe was let go, and he's got a non-compete for a certain amount. He got a severance and a non-compete or something, because we have no podcast from Zach Lowe or podcast appearance for that matter. There's been nothing. Nothing.
Do you think do you think he's just taking a sabbatical? He's just said, man, I've been grinding and doing this, and maybe I'm just going to take this season off. I got enough money in the bank that I can take some time. Maybe
he's still tweeting NBA stuff, but it's just sporadic. Like, it's not, listen, I'd like to think that he's made a lot of money, but he's a podcast and ESPN writer. He couldn't be making that much money. So I can't imagine.
Yeah. Does he have enough money to be off for 8 months? Probably.
Yeah, but I don't want that.
I'm not saying
I don't want that. Come on now. Come on, Zach Lowe. Someone sign with great Bill Simmons. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to be in Ringer, right? That's where he's going to end up, right? I would.
I miss his articles without question. Even today, I was sitting down and eating my breakfast on our off day of school and looking for something to read. And I'm like, man, I really miss reading the 10 things, and I really miss reading the in-depth articles about the different teams and players that he would write about. And just, again, his level of insight from an NBA standpoint, I think, was unmatched. And it's crazy that he doesn't have a job at this point. And like I said, maybe you're right. Maybe it's a non-compete. Maybe there's a certain period of time that he took his severance pay and couldn't get rehired. Maybe there's a chance that he is just taking a little sabbatical and taking some time off to be with his family and just going about it that way. But certainly anybody who is an NBA fan misses the insight that Zach Lowe brought both through his writing and through his podcasting, his appearances on NBA Today. And he just was one of the smarter, more thoughtful NBA writers and NBA personalities out there in terms of his ability to analyze and talk about the games. And I know I miss listening to him all the time on my commute or my exercise routine or whatever it is. And like I said, sitting down and reading the articles that he would put out all the time. It's something that definitely is missed on a regular basis here.
So, like I said, I was disappointed, Mike. I'm disappointed. I wanted to give you a little bit different. I didn't want just NBA. It's tangentially related to the NBA. So,
tangentially related to the NBA. Okay, so I think I am done with the Eastern Conference. There's not really anything else.
I have one more Eastern Conference thing. Do you want me to do my one Eastern Conference thing?
Go ahead and do that one. Go ahead and give me that one.
I'm disappointed that the Detroit Pistons are playing well enough that JB's not complaining as much as I wanted him to this year. Because I really, really thought that they were going to be bad. Like bad, and that we were going to hear him complain about the refereeing. He's still complaining, but they're playing better than I think anyone would have anticipated. I don't know if you have our over-unders handy, Mike. I don't know if you have that paper.
Because I'm in our normal podcasting studio, but that is not the normal place where you and I normally record our NBA pods.
Because I can't imagine that we both picked the over on the Detroit Pistons this year. I just can't. I think I was okay. What was that?
I think the over was pretty low, so I kind of feel like maybe we might have, but certainly I didn't anticipate the Pistons being a game above 5. And right there, they're very close to being they're a half game behind the Hawks for the 6th seed and 2 games behind the Pacers.
I will say this much though, Mike. If we were to get the 1 seed and they somehow were in like the play-in and then like we got to play them in the first round, I would really love kicking his butt in the first round. I really would enjoy that because he would never be able to compete. Detroit would never have a chance, but it would just be fun to watch him complain about everything. It would be fun again. It would bring back childish memories and nostalgia for last season.
Well, look, I think that Detroit has clearly outperformed what people thought they were going to be. And despite the misgivings that we had about JB Bickerstaff as the coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers, it's easy to say that he's done a good job in Detroit. And I think that when you think about JB Bickerstaff as a coach, I think about him as being a really good person to bring in a rebuild situation to build the foundation of we're going to compete, we're going to play defense, we're going to be organized, we're going to be professional. And I think all those things are things that he's brought to the table in Detroit. And then obviously we talked about it a little bit last week, but Cade Cunningham's ascendance this year into a surefire NBA All-Star this season and a guy that it now appears probably can be the best player on a really, really, really good team. And as they continue to build around him, I think the foundation is there in Detroit for them to continue to improve. And I think JB has helped to build that. Now, whether or not he's the guy to take a team from good to great, that's certainly debatable. It's something that he wasn't able to do, or the Cleveland Cavaliers organization didn't feel like he was going to be able to do here in Cleveland. And Kenny Atkinson has obviously proven that this season he's been able to help this team take a leap, although the health of the team has certainly aided in Kenny Atkinson's ability to get the most out of this Cavs team. But I think the Pistons overall have been a major surprise. And yet at the same time, I completely understand your disappointment in wanting to see JB, who we complained about all the time, talking to officials. It was just one of those things that felt like detracted from his ability as a coach, is that he just spent so much time talking to refs as opposed to coaching his team, at least in game.
All right, you summed it up pretty well. I'm excited to see what happens with Detroit the rest of the way. All right, go ahead. Now give me your Western Conference disappointment, Mike.
Okay, Western Conference. Luka Doncic. I mean, I know he's hurt right now, and that in and of itself is a disappointment for Dallas, who has tailed off, obviously without their best player, which you would expect teams to do in many cases. But even prior to the injuries, Luka, who came into the season, I think, off the finals run where he had some nagging injuries, but I think most people felt like the Mavericks coming off that finals, that they were well positioned to make another finals run, and that Luka was poised to be the next MVP. It felt like the narrative around Luka that he was probably the best player who had been first team All NBA for 4 or 5 years in a row, which that streak's going to end this year, but that he was set up to be the MVP. There was some Jokic fatigue that could he surpass the bar of to win 4 and 5 years. Shea was obviously going to win a lot of games with OKC, but there was still a thought that he was maybe a notch below the Jokic, Giannis, Luka triumvirate as far as being the best players in the league. And Luka just came out and once again, I would say was not in tremendous shape. And again, when you look at his numbers, it's hard to say I'm super disappointed in this guy. I mean, he was averaging basically a 28, 8, and 8, which is pretty ridiculous. But when you consider that last year he averaged 33 a game, he was almost at a triple-double. This year he's shooting only 46% from the floor and 35% from three. And he just hasn't been as good, even while he was healthy. He just hasn't been as good, or wasn't as good. And now the fact that he's missed a ton of games and Dallas's team performance has kind of fallen off, it's hard to not look at this season for Luka and for the Mavericks at this point and say that it hasn't been a disappointment. And the Mavs have played 43 games. Luka's played in 22 of them. And he hasn't been nearly up to his own standard in those games. And so I think that when you look at the performance of the Mavericks and kind of where they sit right now, where they're number 7 sitting in the play-in behind the Los Angeles Lakers and the Clippers, I don't think anybody would have predicted that at the beginning of the season. And clearly people thought Luka was going to have a breakout year. And when I look at Luka, I still, and you and I have talked about this in the pod before, it feels like he just doesn't take his off seasons as seriously as he needs to and doesn't come into camp in the best of shape. And he still has been incredible over the last 5 years. And when you look at the youngest to do just about anything in the league, Luka's name is at the very, very top with LeBron in just about every single category. And yet he leaves you wanting in some way, because part of you says, what if this guy was in peak physical condition? What could he do under those circumstances? And to this point in his career, we haven't seen it. And whether or not the injuries that he's had over the course of time, and this calf that's hurt now, he's hurt it multiple times in the last couple of years, is that related to his conditioning? Is it something else? But I'd love to see him come in and be in the best possible shape of his life and play a season and see what he could do. I don't know if we'll ever see it based on what we've seen to this point in his career.
Yeah, I've always been a big Luka fan, and when he played in Cleveland the first time, I made it a point to say, "Hey, Dad, let's go watch him play." I'm super, super disappointed in everything that's happened this year, and I'm hopeful that maybe this will be a wake-up call, right? A wake-up call that he needs to figure it out, because, listen, Dallas is not going anywhere if he's not playing. I'll be honest. I mean, Kyrie can only do so much, and the rest of the team is meh. Be honest. Let's be honest. It is what it is. So I'm hopeful that he'll be back soon. But they haven't even really given an update, right? I mean, the last time I saw him, he was still using the scooter. So
yeah, I've seen too.
So I don't know. All right. My first Western Conference team disappointment is the team that I witnessed yesterday against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that is the Phoenix Suns. Man, oh man. I don't know what is in the water in Phoenix, but there was nothing better than George Niang talking trash to Kevin Durant the whole game. It was glorious. It was fun. It was exciting. Okay, you got Kevin Durant, you got Bradley Beal, and a bunch of nobodies. You got Joseph Nurkic, who's not even playing. He's out of the rotation. They're paying him millions upon millions of dollars to sit his butt on the bench. You got Bradley Beal coming off of the bench, and you've got Mike Budenholzer cooking fried eggs on his head when he's getting so mad at his team and how they're playing. It is just, it's like he's back in Milwaukee, but he's got a much less competent roster because you don't have Giannis Antetokounmpo and you've got an aging Kevin Durant, who, by the way, every single time Kevin Durant touched the ball yesterday, I was like, that shot's going in. That shot's going in. That shot's going in. But he didn't shoot the ball out. Dean Wade did a really, really pretty good job on him. Didn't let him. One thing I will say is watching a game live in person versus watching it on TV, you can see a lot more of how the defense is being played because the camera's not fixed. So like Dean Wade was fronting him every single possession and he was working his butt off. He got an early quick foul on him, or a foul early in the first, and then he didn't pick up another one for a while. He's sitting there fronting. He's being very physical with him, and the refs were letting him do it. When Niang was in the game and he was guarding Durant, and he was being physical. Now Niang got like 4 fouls. He was close to fouling out, but really, really listen. Phoenix Suns. I don't exactly know what's going on there. As you alluded to earlier, I don't think Jimmy Butler is the fix because listen, he's played his way out of Chicago. He's played his way out of Minnesota. He didn't really play his way out of Philly. He played his contract out, and you never really heard him say anything about the Philly situation. That's really the only situation, right, that he hasn't really complained about or had caused a tantrum. And then Miami, everything was fine until this year. I don't know. Maybe he just sees that there's no chance with this roster, and but I just don't. I don't think that Jimmy Butler is the fix for Phoenix. I think if anything else, that might make it even worse, to be honest with you. And I mean, I don't know. Is Jimmy Butler good buds with Kevin Durant? Is Jimmy Butler good buds with Bradley Beal? No, not Bradley Beal would be traded, right? That would be the swap would essentially be Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler. Here's what I'm going to say. If Miami can make it happen, Bradley Beal, I'm malcontented Jimmy Butler, and Bradley Beal's pretty malcontent right now. I mean, I don't think he loves coming off the bench, right, Mike? Yeah.
I don't think so. But
so if he went to Miami, at least he would start. I don't, like I said, I don't know how happy he's going to be about that. But and that team, I honestly, for Bradley Beal, he could see the Phoenix Suns as a thing. At least Miami could like get in like the 5 spot maybe with Bradley Beal. Now, once again, Bradley Beal has to be healthy. That's a big question mark. But I don't know. Like, once again, I don't think any of these situations are good. Honestly, I don't think Jimmy Butler is going to end up getting traded before the trade deadline. I just don't see it happening. And I think it's going to be a cinema when they're in the playoffs and he has to play for them. That's what I want. That's the best situation. I think he doesn't get traded and he has to play for Miami in the playoffs. That's my favorite storyline.
Yeah, I agree with that. Bradley Beal, the Miami Heat doesn't want Bradley Beal, not because they don't want Bradley Beal, the player, but Beal has, I believe, so Butler has the player option for next year at like $52 million, and Beal has, I think, 2 years beyond that. So there's no way that Miami wants to pay Bradley Beal $150 million over the next 3 years. That's just not going to happen. I don't see any scenario. Phoenix doesn't have any picks really to attach to that to make it worth the Miami Heat's while to be able to do that. So I don't see it happening. I think when you look at Phoenix, right, it comes down to the rest of their roster beyond Durant and Booker. And if you want to throw Beal in there, the rest of their roster just isn't good enough. I mean, it's made up of guys who probably should be the 8th man on a good team. And when you have spots 4, 5, 6, and 7 that you're filling with guys who should be the 8th man on a good NBA roster, night in, night out, that's a problem. And I think you said it best when you're watching Kevin Durant and he's playing offense. It still feels like every single shot the guy takes is going to go in. And that goes back to watching him play with the Warriors against the Cavs in the finals. And anytime you've watched this guy play throughout his career, that's just the feeling that you get when he rises up to shoot. And yet when you think about the Butler situation, or you think about him engineering his way first to Golden State and then to Brooklyn and now here in Phoenix, it seems like he's hitched his wagon to a dubious cast of characters. And I guess I would add Jimmy Butler to that. If he's agitating Matt Ishbia to bring in Jimmy Butler, that doesn't seem like a marriage that's going to go all that well or put that team in any way, shape, or form into true contention in the Western Conference and certainly for the NBA Finals. So at Phoenix, yeah, they have to be a disappointment. At the same time, there was a lot of concern when the team was brought together that could those guys stay healthy. I think everybody thought that when the three of those guys played together that they'd have a pretty potent offense. And for the most part, I think that's probably been true when those three guys are on the floor. But it hasn't been nearly as potent as what it would need to be to make up for their defense and for the lack of depth in the roster. And so if you look at the totality of this Durant, Booker, Beal experience since Matt Ishbia bought the Phoenix Suns from Robert Sarver, I think you would have to say that at this point, Phoenix has been and probably will continue to be for the rest of this season and on into the foreseeable future because they just don't have any draft capital. This team's going to be disappointing for a while unless something really, really changes that I don't see how this roster is capable of doing it. And I don't see trading for Jimmy Butler if they end up doing that. I don't see how that works either.
Yeah, everything you said rings true with me. I just don't see how the trade happens, to be honest with you, because like you said, Miami doesn't want Beal. Well, I can't imagine that Phoenix really, really, really wants Jimmy Butler, but maybe they do. I don't know. I just don't see it happening, Mike. I just don't. I don't
see how it makes a difference. Like even if they get Jimmy Butler, and you get a happy Jimmy Butler for the remainder of this season, and then does he opt out at the end of the year? Does Phoenix promise him that they're going to sign him to a long-term deal, which is obviously what he wanted in Miami and why he got upset with the Heat in the first place? Is Ishbia dumb enough to pay 36-year-old Jimmy Butler $150 million over the next 3 seasons? That seems pretty dumb. I guess maybe Ishbia would do it, but that doesn't seem like a good business move. It seems like you'd be trying to work your way off of this particular team and off this particular roster and trying to offload money and guys and maybe start trying to turn things around and rebuild around. I guess you'd probably want to rebuild around Booker. There was obviously the Durant to Houston rumors, which I don't think Houston's going to do anything in that area either. And I'm not sure Durant would necessarily want to go, but yeah,
I don't know. Part of it might say, I want to go to Houston and win a championship, and to rub it in James Harden's face because I know how petty Durant is, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess you could do that, but all indications and things that I've heard is that he doesn't really want to go to Houston, and that Houston doesn't really want to do anything. They want to kind of keep their young core, do what Oklahoma City did last year, which is go into the playoffs with the group that you have, see what you get, and then figure out, okay, these are some holes that we got to shore up, and then maybe next year is the year that Houston really goes for it. That being said, Houston right now is sitting in the 2 seed in the Western Conference, which I think we both thought that Houston was going to be improved and have a good year and have a good chance at making the playoffs. But I certainly didn't see them being halfway through the season and being a number 2 seed right now.
All right, your next Western Conference or your Western Conference pick. Can I guess where you're going to go?
Well, before we go that, we got to talk some Magic Mind because we've had a couple snow days here that have enabled me to be able to get a lot of work done, which has been great. And not being at school has enabled me to get some podcasting work done. Got a bunch of episodes that put together that are now ready to go, and also have been able to do some guest outreach and just do some things to kind of plan. And Magic Mind has helped me tremendously. I know we talked about it last week, and when I think about what I've been able to get done here over these 4 days, the weekend, and then the 2 days that we're, we've had off so far, and then getting off tomorrow, Magic Mind has just helped me with the mental performance shots, have kept me focused when I'm working on the things that I need to do and get done. And then the sleep shots at night, when it's nice when I don't have to get up at 6 a.m. to get my workout in. I can sleep in, and the sleep shots have definitely helped me in that area. And I know for you, it's been working as well, despite the fact you got a little under the.
It's helped me sleep. It's helped me sleep, Mike. I'll be honest with you. It's helped me. It's helped me sleep a lot. So it's been great, and we couldn't recommend it more. So make sure that you get your Magic Mind. And I know Mike has a promo code, right, Mike? You got a promo code?
Absolutely. So if you are a Hoopheads listener, you can go to www.magicmind.com/hoopheadsjan, and you can get 45% off the Magic Mind bundle, which is the sleep shot and the mental performance shots. And you want to take advantage of this offer here before the month of January ends. And again, that's www.magicmind.com/hoopheadsjan, HOOPHEADSJAN. As Jason said, we can't recommend Magic Mind more. It's been a tremendous boost to my productivity. And also, as Jason said, I've slept better since I've started using the Magic Mind sleep shot. So if you're a listener of the Hoopheads pod, get out to magicmind.com/hoopheadsjan and get 45% off the Magic Mind bundle now before the month of January ends. All right, let's move on to my next Western Conference disappointment.
Can I guess where you're going to go? Can I guess where you're going to go?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Zion.
No,
what?
I got one before. If you look at the standings, I don't know if you have the standings pulled up, but if you look at the standings, I'm going to get to a team before I get to the Pelicans. Zion is on my list, but I got a team that I'm going to go to before that.
Okay. Zion's the last one on my list, Mike, so.
Okay, well, we'll share that one because this is my second to last one, and it is the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Oh, yeah, I guess that.
The Minnesota Timberwolves, when I look back, and although I don't have the paper in front of me, I do remember this one, that when I talked about teams that I thought really legitimately could win the title, the Minnesota Timberwolves.
You include Minnesota instead of the Cavs, Mike. Tisk.
I had Minnesota in my they can win the NBA title. And I still think that my reasoning was relatively sound. And let me just go back and walk through the reasons why I felt like Minnesota would be a legitimate title contender. Number one, they made it to the Western Conference Finals last year on the basis of a league best defense, which when you subtract Karl-Anthony Towns from the team, which they did, doesn't feel like that would impact your defense in any material way, although it probably did. But at the time, I didn't feel like it would because Karl-Anthony Towns is not known as a tremendous defensive player. So I thought, okay, you're building a team from a base of the number one returning defense in the league. So that was number one. Number two, there was a time that after the Timberwolves knocked off Denver last year in the playoffs that we were talking about, could Anthony Edwards carry that team to an NBA title? And could he start to be looked upon in the same vein as Michael Jordan? There were certainly comparisons out there. We talked about it on the podcast. I heard it said on numerous other things and read numerous other comparisons after the Timberwolves beat Denver that Anthony Edwards was going to be on that trajectory. And then the last part of the Minnesota equation, which I already mentioned, but talking about a little bit more in depth, is I really felt like the subtraction of Karl-Anthony Towns from this team was going to be an addition. And granted, the things that Towns has brought to the Knicks were things that he brought to Minnesota, at least during the regular season. And that was his ability to stretch the floor as a five and his ability as a versatile offensive player who can score in a lot of different ways. Towns has been a better rebounder in New York than he ever was in Minnesota. And certainly his performance in New York to this point has been surprising to me. I still think that when push comes to shove in the playoffs with the New York Knicks, I'm not so sure how additive Karl-Anthony Towns is going to be to what the Knicks are going to be trying to do in the Eastern Conference playoffs. But to this point, I guess you could say Minnesota has missed Karl-Anthony Towns' offense. Randall hasn't been super effective, and I don't know that Minnesota, look, do they regret that trade? Maybe. I mean, my question more is, do they regret the Rudy Gobert trade? I don't know where you go back with this franchise. I feel like in some ways, the Timberwolves are similar to the early LeBron Cavs in that they tried to accelerate the timeline by getting Gobert, and it sort of worked last year. And now things have kind of fallen apart. And I don't know. You have to look at this team sitting at 22-21, and they're currently in 9th in the Western Conference. And look, Edwards is having a good year. I don't know that he's taken a huge leap. He's still, as he said earlier in the year, I don't want to be passing the ball. He wants to score, which I guess is an honest statement. But the best player on the team obviously has to take some accountability for being a playmaker and trying to make other guys better. And it doesn't feel like Edwards is necessarily there now. Look, he's had an outstanding individual year. He's averaging 26 a game. He's shooting a ton of threes. The one thing is he's not getting to the line nearly as much as he did in years past because he's jacking up so many threes. He's only averaging like 5.5 free throws a game. And for a guy with his athleticism and size and strength, like you'd want to see historically guys in Edwards' age bracket with his level of physical tools, those guys are getting to the line 10 times a game. And he's just shooting way too many threes. That's despite the fact that he's shooting almost 43% on 10 attempts a game. And I don't know if I would say Edwards has been a disappointment, but certainly the team around him has been. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's missing what Towns brought as a floor spacer. I don't know if it's the fact that Randall is almost the polar opposite of Towns when it comes to being able to spread the floor. And also Randall's a guy that likes to operate with the ball in his hands, which obviously gets in the way or at least conflicts with what Edwards wants to do because he's best with the ball in his hands. DiVincenzo hasn't been nearly as good as I think that they hoped when they brought him over from the Knicks in that trade. Jaden McDaniels has underperformed. Gobert is Gobert. I mean, he's still a factor defensively, but offensively, we all know what his limitations are. It's just when you look at this team and what we thought they were going to be coming into the season, there's no way that, again, anybody would have pegged this team for 9th in the Western Conference when we're halfway through the season. Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, I think the biggest indictment to me of the way Minnesota. Did you watch the game on Saturday night?
I did.
They didn't look like they were enjoying themselves at all, Mike.
No, it's not a happy team.
They're not happy. I mean, the Cavs were shorthanded. They didn't have Mobley. They didn't have Okoro. And LeVert played terrible. And Mitchell played great. Garland played pretty well. Okay. But they didn't look like they loved the game of basketball. And there were parts of the time the Cavs were up and down on that game, but I was never at any point worried that they were going to lose that game. I just didn't feel like Minnesota had anything to do wanted anything to do with playing a basketball game. And then obviously they ended up going up by like 20, and the final score was not indicative of the beatdown that the Cavs had given them because the lead got shrunk in the later stages of the game. But I mean, I don't know. That's my biggest problem was they just didn't look like they like each other. They didn't look like they were loving what they were doing. And that's my biggest problem with what I saw from them. And that may have been the first full game that I've sat and watched them play this year, to be honest with you, Mike. I know
it's fair. You haven't And there's been lots of stories coming out that the chemistry is not right. I know Edwards has had several things in game and post game where he's had comments about just the fact that it's not necessarily a fun team and that guys aren't getting along and whatever. And that makes a difference, right? I mean, it really does. And it remains to be seen whether or not they can right the ship and turn the corner. I would anticipate that it's going to get better, but maybe it doesn't. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see what happens with Randall at the end of the year and what they decide to do with him. Clearly, he was I don't want to say centerpiece, but the centerpiece of that trade. And it doesn't appear like, at least to this point, that it's worked out. Maybe in the playoffs it changes, or maybe as the season wears along that they get it together. But is Minnesota interested in signing Julius Randle long term? It doesn't seem like he's a great fit next to Anthony Edwards. And going back to my early LeBron Cavs comparison, it just feels like they've rushed the timeline. And as a result, how do you build a championship team around Anthony Edwards with guys that are on the same timeline as him when you've got all this money tied up in guys who are clearly older than him, and Gobert and Randall, that don't necessarily fit perfectly around Edwards? I mean, Gobert obviously brings what he brings on the defensive end of the floor, but offensively, he can't play on the perimeter or space the floor in any way, shape, or form. And so he's got to be around the basket. And if you have Anthony Edwards, I guess with Edwards shooting 10 threes a game, maybe it doesn't matter that Gobert's standing down there on the block. But to me, if you're going to get the best out of Anthony Edwards, he's got to be getting to the rim. And like I said earlier, getting to the line 10 times a game and attacking the rim. And it just doesn't appear like that's the way that they want to play or can play this year with the personnel. So I don't know what Minnesota does going forward other than try to figure out what to do with this roster and see if they can't get it together and maybe make a run in the playoffs by just working with what they have. Because I don't think there's a lot of moves that can be made at least in season that are going to make a difference. So we'll see what happens with Minnesota.
All right, the last one we're going to talk about, we've kind of already alluded to it, is Zion Williamson, Mike. He comes back from injury. He plays in one game, and then he gets suspended for a game because he's late to the plane. And then he plays another game, and then he's sick, and he's listed as questionable again tomorrow, Mike, with an illness. Like, what's going on?
I will say that when he came back, he does look like he's in shape, at least for Zion. He's not the bloated guy that we saw last year in the play-in tournament, or I'm sorry, in the in-season tournament. He does look like he's in shape, and in the couple games that he's played, he's been effective, but he's nowhere near the guy that we've seen at his peak. Like right now, Zion's shooting 48% from the floor, which at his peak, he was shooting close to 60 and just bulldozing guys and getting to the rim sort of at will. What's most disappointing about Zion, we've said it over and over again, is that he's just such a unique physical talent, and not just physical talent, but the guy knows how to play. Like, he's a good passer. He knows how to play the game of basketball, and he's just a guy that's in such a unique package and is so fun to watch when he's at his best. And he's so difficult for teams to handle because you can't put a big guy on him because he's too fast and explosive. You can't put a guard or a small guy on him because he's too strong going to the rim. And it's just crazy that his career, when you talk about, he's a disappointment this year. When you talk about the totality of his career, kind of looking at, like we talked about with Embiid at the very beginning of the podcast, to this point, his career, based on what we thought he was going to be coming out of Duke, his career is a huge, huge disappointment in terms of just the production, the number of games that he's played, and just overall the way that he's conducted himself as an NBA player. It's hard to imagine a guy being drafted number one overall that, in all honesty, right? I mean, when he's been on the floor, it's worked out, but he just hasn't been able to stay on the floor for whatever reason. And I think that one game suspension gave us a window into some of the why behind him not being able to reach his potential to this point in his NBA career, because he just has done what behind the scenes seems like a lot of things that are professional, and that hurts you. There's no way in today's game that if you go back in the history of the league when we didn't know any better and guys didn't take care of their body and we had all these things going on and whatever. Now, I mean, guys know what it takes to be at the best and be at their best day in and day out. It doesn't seem like Zion has made that kind of commitment to himself and to his team. If there was ever a guy that needed a change of scenery, he's the guy. It'll be very, very interesting to see what New Orleans decides to do with him, and if he ends up going somewhere else, whether or not he's able to turn his career around, both from a professional standpoint and from a keeping his body at the right, keep getting his body right so that he can perform at his best. And even if he can, who knows if he can stay healthy just with that body type and the amount of explosiveness that he has. Maybe he's just destined to always be a guy who's hurt. But just like we talked about with Luka, it'd be nice to see him in the best shape of his life at all times and conducting himself like a professional, see what he could do, because I know it doesn't ring as true as it used to, but for the vast majority of the time he's been on the floor, he's been historically great when he's on the court. There's been very few guys that have been able to do the things that he's done when he's been at his best. Now, he hasn't been at his best for the last year and a half, other than that playing game against the Lakers before he got hurt last year.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, it pains you to see, because I think he's one of the most exciting players in the league when he's right.
Yeah, for sure. One of the best players in the league when he's playing, but he just can't play. I think it's time, Mike, to officially say that he needs to relocate. He needs a fresh start. He needs a fresh start.
I agree. I mean, New Orleans has to basically take their team, and I think if you're in New Orleans at this point, you're doing whatever you can to find a good deal for Zion, find a good deal for Brandon Ingram, see if you can find a contender that'll take the rest of CJ McCollum's contract, and you're trying to build around Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. Those are your two guys they're not your cornerstones in terms of those two guys are never going to be the best player on a championship team, but those are two really, really high-level players that if those are guys, probably 3, 4, 5, that you can win. Those are championship guys that are your 4th and 5th starter or your 3rd and 4th starter. I just don't think that Ingram and Zion, for whatever reason, certainly that pairing's not going to work. And then when you think about whether or not one of those guys individually can be the best guy in a championship team, I don't think Ingram can. I think Zion could be in an ideal circumstance, but New Orleans is not that circumstance, and maybe Zion's not the guy to be able to untap his own potential, for lack of a better way of saying it. But yeah, I think it's time for New Orleans to explore Zion Williamson trades, and I'm sure as the season goes on and as we get to the offseason, we're going to do a lot of speculating about Zion's next home.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Mike, have we said enough tonight?
I think we said enough. I think we're disappointed enough for one night, and we got through and talked about the different things that we feel like, man, if only these teams would have been able to perform, or these individuals would have been able to perform a little better. So that's enough disappointment for one night. We'll come back next week, hopefully with some more positivity. Maybe we can go all positive next week, and hopefully Cavs got an interesting week playing Houston twice and getting Philly with who knows what combination of players. So we'll see how the Cavs week goes. But
no Mobley and
appreciate everyone checking us out tonight.
No Mobley and Okoro tomorrow night, Mike.
Well, there you go. And no school for us tomorrow. So even though I'm staying up late, I do not have to get up at 6 a.m. after staying up till 1 or 1:30 tonight to get the episode all prepped and ready to go. So I'm appreciative of that. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. All right. Good work.
Power through, man.
You hung in there somehow, some way.
Yep. Oh, jeez.
Did Philly just go on like a 20-0 run?
They went on a big run to end the quarter, yeah.
Oh, wait.
I'm watching it.
No, I thought it said 87, because it was 77-67 Denver, and then I looked up and I thought it said 87.
No, but it was
Philly,
7. They were down by 20 at one point. So